Great. Okay, so Domenico, if you can allow the latest people to join the call, then for now I'll give a short presentation. And let me see about who we are. So we are the Systems Mapping and Co-Design Lab. A very nice name for a group of researchers who a couple of years ago um, started using systems thinking and systems mapping in a research project called OSMARA, Organizational Structures for Smallholder Resilience. But what we did in that particular research project was using causal loop diagramming and value network mapping to systems mapping practices to engage in capacity building with smallholder farmers in Malawi and Zimbabwe, to organize multi-stakeholder sessions in the dairy and the seed sectors, and basically use systems thinking and systems mapping to initiate systems change. We did that in various other settings later on as well, after which we spread to various research institutes all around. And that's where we continued doing the work that we really love, that we found out that resonates with a lot of other people. And we started then a co-design lab because, yeah, we held some meetings online and more people joined, and we shared a lot of thoughts and experiences, and that's where it became more kind of structured. So that's the systems mapping and co-design lab. And that started then with Carlo Cucchi in Wageningen University. Domenico D'Antoni was basically the main founder of this and initiator of this co-design lab systems mapping. Maria Roglic and Ramin Bender. It's myself and Timothy Magnise, who's with World Fish. So it's really like an informal non-profit. It's a learning space where we want to find out more about what are the different ways to engage in systems mapping, how then to co-design these systems. And well, as you'll probably, when you're working in the field, it brings a lot of benefits, but it also comes with challenges. So it's really an informal learning space to share the questions that we face, to learn from each other, and with that have a free space to talk about, well, the great things that we enjoy as well as the questions that we face, to improve the work that we do, to create the systems change that we want to create in many different settings. And today it's predominantly focused on the agri-food setting. The other thing that we want to achieve is really this link between research and practice, and of course the blurry lines between them as well. So today we have two great practitioners, Ivo and Hannes, who will share their experiences and their practices with us. And after that, we can have a great, fruitful discussion and questions to really make use of this learning space that we initiated today in this session. So we want to bridge theory and practice with these sessions. So this is sponsored by Montpellier Business School, where Domenico is located, and Creativo Design, which is founded by Ramin Bender. And well, that's also kind of the venue that organizes these discussions, these events, and that creates opportunities really specifically focusing on systems thinking, mapping, and co-design. So if after this call you want to get in contact, share your thoughts, perhaps have a suggestion to present, please reach out to us. It's really appreciated, and it's, I think, also what keeps this kind of community going. So please do so when you have some other thoughts. Of course, there are also some ground or some kind of house rules, basically to structure presentations as well as discussions that we have afterwards. So we try to keep a lot of time for our Q&A. So our speakers of today will have 20 minutes to present, after which we have 10 minutes for clarifying questions. We do that for the 2 presentations. So then basically after an hour, we have 1 hour remaining to really go deep into, well, the many questions and challenges that we face and open up the floor to these kind of more clarifying questions. Not clarifying the concepts, but really, you know, how did you do the things? What were the challenges you experienced, and so forth. So questions, feedback, and voice of participants, you in the audience, that's really what matters to us, which is why we allocate also a considerable amount of time for the Q&A. As you do right now, in a very great way, please mute your mic when the others are speaking and when you're not speaking yourself. Then, of course, open up the mic. If you have any questions or reflections, please put them in the chat. Try to keep an eye out for them or raise your virtual hand. We will curate then the Q&A afterwards, and this really helps, as well as it's a nice backlog of the questions and the reflections that you have shared, because as we all know, there's a lot of knowledge and experience with the speakers, but especially also a lot of knowledge and experience with the people in the audience. So we're really also curious to hear more about that. So that's basically with it, the kind of the house rules that we want to share with you today. Important also to really foster this learning space that we want to set up. So today we have really great speakers, and I'm really, I was really looking forward to this session. We had to postpone it, but well, we're here today, and I'm sure it was worth the wait. I'm really curious about the session today because it's the first session on systems thinking, mapping, and co-design, where we really also more dive into this role of entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship in creating this systems change. And we have Hannes van den Eeckhout. He's a founder of Rootical Venture Building, who uses participatory systems mapping to create impact ventures in order to get to this regenerative food system. And we have Ivo, co-founder of Climate Farmers, and well, they're an impact venture designed to trigger systemic change or CO2 capture within the agriculture sector, but also have built this great map of food systems dynamic in Europe, and what it means for the food systems change that's needed to for a healthy food system, so to say. So those are 2 great speakers today. From practice, I'm really happy with that. And without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Ivo to kick it off. So let's see. I will stop sharing, and then we can start with Ivo.
Wonderful. Thank you, and great to meet everyone. And thanks, Rob and Domenico for organizing, and Hannes for making the connection. It's an interesting topic, sort of the whole, let's say, systemic approaches and the business or entrepreneurship or venture part of it. Maybe to kick us off, I have to correct one piece, which is that our work is not designed for CO2 capture. It's very much a co-benefit, something that happens as an effect of our work, not very much not the purpose of our work, but it gives me an opportunity to speak to something important that in this context of venture building and systemic approaches. So maybe for a bit of context, we work in the field of regenerative agriculture. Shall I explain regenerative agriculture, or is everybody here very familiar with it? Would anybody like a short introduction to regenerative agriculture? Can I get a sign if anyone does? Okay, let me do a quick introduction. Regenerative agriculture is the proper form to formulate this, I guess, is regenerating forms of agriculture, because there is a ton of different forms of practicing agriculture in such a way that it leads to regeneration. organic is a version of this, agroecological farming is a version of this, and there is a lot of conventional farming that has a regenerative effect as well. Essentially, it's a way to practice agriculture that contributes to the ecology of the farm, the health of the ecology of the farm, of the economy of the farm, and of the community of the farm. We have a paradigm in agriculture since roughly 80 years, end of the Second World War in Europe, where our main concern was produce as much food as possible, because after Second World War, all of our agricultural supply chains were really down, were really broken, and we had to make sure there was enough food. Let's say, I say we, it's probably more properly said, the Americans had a big interest in there being enough food in Europe, because there was a big interest in avoiding a slip into communism. And so basically having enough food available helps for people not to come up with funny ideas. And so a main focus after Second World War was the rebuilding of the agricultural and food systems, to make sure that everybody has enough food. And so we invested heavily in what today would be called industrial agriculture, probably often called conventional agriculture as well. Basically a system that treats agriculture as a production line, right? Like you input something, you input fertilizer, you input pesticides, you input seeds, and out comes a standardized product, wheat that all looks the same, apples that all look the same, tomatoes that all look the same. And that has been very, very helpful in producing a ton of food. We produce more food than we have ever before. In fact, we produce way too much food in the world currently. In Europe, we have created a system that is incredibly productive. And actually, we flood global markets, such as, for example, in a lot of Africa, with our subsidized European products. But let's say the initial intention of it to avoid scarcity of food was achieved. And what we have now is a system that is stuck in that original purpose, right? The purpose is produce a lot of food. And so we have defined a metric, which is yield, produce as much of one given crop per hectare as possible. And we have become incredibly good at this. At the same time, we also see this dynamic of reduced environmental health and health issues. So actually, I'm going to share for a moment while I talk about this our map, because this is exactly what it talks about. The last couple of years we spent on understanding the food system and its dynamics, and what we have here is that exact core loop, right? So we have the objective of providing affordable food, as much of it as possible, and as cheap as possible, in order for there to be the sense of food security. Having that reinforces policies that favor this kind of agriculture, this kind of extractive industrial agriculture, and that reinforces again those extractive supply chains. Now, we have those unintended consequences, and those unintended impacts are significant, right? We know the huge problems of biodiversity. We know that agriculture contributes about, depending on who you ask, about 30% of emissions globally. In Europe, it's a bit less. In Europe, it's about 10%. We know that the food we eat has much less nutritional integrity, often makes us sick, as in the case of wheat that is overbred. So we get all of these negative consequences. On the other hand, we have the potential of building a system that is not built on using soil, but actually building it up. So instead of using soil as a substrate that we just put fertilizer in, put seeds in, put pesticides in, we instead invest in the health of the soil, and then look at how does the soil express itself. Fairly esoteric term there, and yet very, very important. In regenerative agriculture, the fundamental shift that we're making from our current systems of agriculture to regenerating forms of agriculture, instead of saying, what do I want to grow, we ask the question, what wants to grow here? If I'm talking about a ecosystem in the south of Spain, we're talking about a particular ecosystem that wants to emerge from there. We have brittleness. We have, you know, only rainfall in certain times of the year. So there's a certain kind of ecosystem that wants to grow here. If you live in the Netherlands, it's a very different kind of ecosystem that wants to emerge there. If you live in Scandinavia, it's a very different kind of ecosystem. And I don't know what exactly the ecosystem looks like around where Hannes is, but I guess it's a very different ecosystem again. So each soil, each climate, each context is trying to express a different kind of ecosystem. And now we can try and put the same system everywhere, or we can say, okay, well, in Central Europe, the ecosystem is trying to become a forest. How do we go with that flow and build our agriculture into it? And instead of resisting this turning into a forest, we go with it, and meanwhile, we benefit from it. That was not a short introduction to regenerative agriculture. Sorry, but it's very hard to do a short introduction to regenerative agriculture. This looks very, very different in each context. So this sometimes has the integration of animals, sometimes trees, sometimes it looks like that, sometimes it looks like that. And that is the core of it. Regenerative agriculture is context specific, right? Like it looks fundamentally different in each case. So what we are trying to map here is how does the current system support or block the development towards a regenerative agri-food system. And I'm saying not only regenerative agriculture, but a regenerative agri-food system, because the situation we have right now is that farmers actually want to implement regenerating forms of agriculture. Of course, they want to have a healthy economy on the farm. Of course, they want to support a healthy community. Of course, they know that supporting the ecology of the farm is fundamental to the survival of their farm and of their family. Yet, they are stuck in a trap. And so we have created a system where rather than them wanting to destroy the ecosystem, they really want to do it, of course. Created market dynamics, we have created supply chains, we have created research and education, we have created finance and insurance, and we have created farmer communities, all of which make it very difficult for farmers to take that decision to do this. And now the interesting thing is you can now try and force the change of the farm, which is what a lot of people are trying to do. So trying to increase the amount of farms that practice regenerative agriculture by funding them or by creating subsidies or regulation that makes them do this. But then they would still have to fight against all of these forces that we are looking at here, right? So we have the farmer situation. Just to take a few examples, we have the debt spiral that farmers are in. We have the problem that land is becoming increasingly consolidated, so the less and less land is available for farmers. We have the succession gap. We have less and less people wanting to get into agriculture. We have the fact that this is just what people are used to. So all of these dynamics lead to farmers implementing conventional agriculture. And now we can work against all of these system dynamics and force change. But of course, the system is always going to go back to this. Or we can say, instead of trying to do this, we intervene in the system and we change the way that the system works in such a way that the farmers are actually freed up to do the thing that they already know needs to be done, right? So this is why we're taking a systemic approach. To be honest, it's the cheaper way. It's simply easier than to fight against a very, very strong system that we have in place right now. Now we get to the really interesting question of the entrepreneurship part of this, because in the climate farmers starting point was that I come from the social entrepreneurship world. So I thought we start a business in this. And I thought that, you know, we have social entrepreneurship, we have a lot of investors looking to invest in social change, so they must love the idea of a business working systemically. And now, sorry, I have the downer. They don't. Thank you, Domenico. That is exactly the the emoticon. They do not. And this is a major issue we have, which is that we currently have an impact investment scene and a growing impact investment scene. We have a very enthusiastic impact investment scene that does not invest in the least in systemic entrepreneurship. And so there is definitely a scenario in which through entrepreneurship, you can create systems change. Just to quote one example, our business arm worked in the carbon markets. You can think about the carbon markets, whatever you want, but there is funding there in order to drive change forward. I'm very happy that we have left the carbon market now. But originally, we started in the carbon market in order to equip them to fund regenerative agriculture. And what we did is we used venture funding to develop the first methodology in the space of European agriculture. And then we published that open source, and we trained all of our competitors in the usage of this methodology. You can still find that on our YouTube channel, like a series of sessions that we did in sort of how to use our methodology. And today, most actors in the European space that do carbon credits from agriculture use a version of our methodology. In the European space, we have the process going on for like EU frameworks for carbon farming. And since most actors in the European space use a version of our methodology, the European carbon farming certification framework, CRCF, that's the one, looked at what is already in place and of course sort of said, okay, well, it seems like most people are actually already in agreement. So we had a major systemic change success there. But what we have to be aware of is that we did something that was counterintuitive to investors, right? We took something that took us 1.5 years to develop, and then we open sourced it and made it much easier for our competitors to bypass us, right? So I do believe there is a major potential by entrepreneurial ventures to effectuate system change. We see it in the negative. Meta has created system change. Instagram has changed the life of children, definitely. ChatGPT has changed a lot. Uber has created transportation, has changed transportation 100%. So we know that entrepreneurial ventures change systems. But what we don't have right now is a system to enable and fund intentionally systemic ventures to actually for the entrepreneur to actually continue doing this. And so I hope I created a good segue for Hannes to describe how they are working on that, because I think it's extremely important that we do it. And I can say after years of building in this space, it's not in place yet. I think I'm a bit over time and it's still scratching the surface, but I hope I created a little provocation.
So great, Ivo. Thank you so much for this presentation, for this provocation, and also this nice bridge to Hannes. I mean, you had a few minutes left, but then again, it's also a few minutes of great opportunities for the audience to ask some clarifying questions. So once more, also welcome to the ones who have joined this session later. We just had a presentation of Ivo, co-founder of Climate Farmers. And the setup that we have today is 20 minutes of a presentation. Then we have 10 minutes to basically clarify things that were either unclear, some concepts that were not understood. And then after that, we continue with the presentation by Hannes. Same again, clarifying questions for things that you might not have understood. And then we will have a plenary Q&A where we will discuss and deep dive into the big questions that we want to challenge. So are there any clarifying questions at this point that we want to know from Ivo? If not, I have one. So you mentioned about this system,
One
and
did just pop up, but sorry, maybe you can also go after yours. Bram just popped up.
Yeah, Bram, please go ahead.
Yeah, no, indeed. Thanks for this presentation. I joined a little bit late, so I might have missed a bit. I really appreciated your reflections, and I also really admire the systemic mapping that you've done with the Kumu methodology. I think that's really super interesting. Maybe just a more general question about, yeah, how do you use the systems mappings that you do in your discussion with stakeholders, and what do you find is the best way for that story to come across using this systems mapping? Because I always find, it's interesting to have this map, and how do you use it effectively as a tool to get your story across? Because I think that's potentially super powerful. But this is maybe more methodological or a sort of an engagement question rather than a content question. So
I very much hear you. Maybe quickly. So I just want to share this because if you look at this, let's say there are very few people who enjoy this, right? Like I'm sure there are people who enjoy looking at system maps, but I think very few people will have, clicked through this and said, like loop by loop, okay, how exactly does this work and what are all the connections, etc. I think a lot of people would look at this and be like, okay, interesting, and then move on, right?
yeah, exactly.
So I'm completely with you that the mapping is interesting. Let's put it like this way: the mapping is more interesting than a map, right? The mapping process is interesting, and so I think there's huge value in not doing this somewhere in the back, like sort of to be the consultant that interviews individually of these people, because then what all of this means, but nobody else does really, right? And so what we have realized pretty quickly is we started mapping this for ourselves originally because we wanted to rework our theory of change. And then we realized while doing it that the conversation is super, super interesting, right? Like, I don't know, like I'm just going to choose a random one here. But like, if we look at the consolidation of land and generational renewal, young generation's interest in farming career, how exactly does this go and what leads to what and why does this lead to that? And so then the conversation becomes really, really interesting. And then you're like, no, this is not actually how this goes. It goes like this, and this is because of that. And so what I find is that the mapping is a wonderful engagement tool. The map is a terrible engagement tool, right? So it's more like the value that a visual harvester has in a room, right? So I think this is for me what I'm concluding. I love the mapping process, and then to actually work with the map afterwards, that takes quite a lot of work because how do you identify the leverage points in there? It's difficult.
Yeah, because that would be my follow-up question, but maybe we'll get into that later. Exactly.
Yeah,
Thanks.
let's keep that one for later. Was there another clarifying question? If not, I have one. So you've mentioned about this that basically the kind of the enabling system for ventures that really intentionally want to create systems change is not ready yet. And you specifically mentioned the role of finance and investors. And I was wondering, is it also other kind of enabling organizations or enabling actors that are not ready, or is it really specifically the investment actors? So what part of the system is not ready yet? Is it the grander system, or is it really specifically the venture capital and the investment?
I mean, venture capital couldn't be further away from it, including very much the social VC, impact VC stuff. But it's so the problem is this idea of systemic approaches. It's extremely new, right? I mean, obviously it's not new. Obviously it's ancient, etc., etc. But the idea of applying this in our current economic system is very new, and we've just barely gotten used to the idea of a business not being purely extractive. Like just the other day here, I went climbing with a few people, and they asked me what I did, and I said I run a social enterprise, and they said, you run a what? And I said a social business, and they said, do you run a business or a non-profit? I said I run a business that, you know, creates positive impact. They said that's not a thing, right? So it's still very new, this idea that a business is something that can also contribute something to society. And then now the idea that a business is systemic. So just one example of this, right? Like we've gone through way too many accelerator programs with our business. We've gone through a total of, I think, 13 accelerator programs. Nobody should ever do that. That's a terrible idea. But having run through 13 accelerator programs, I have a good idea of what the accelerator ecosystem looks like. And every single accelerator program whom we explained that we are pursuing a systemic approach tried to absolutely force us into impact measurement. So they were like, you have to measure your impact. That is very, very important. And every single accelerator program, I had a long fight to tell them, you cannot measure systemic impact. You cannot measure systemic impact. Every single accelerator program fought this through with me and tried to convince me that no, it just takes more thinking. And if you do enough thinking, then you can also measure systemic impact. And this is a fundamental misunderstanding. So the delay in thinking, right? Like we've had deep thinkers on social impact, and then we have a huge movement that comes after these deep thinkers and now try to implement it. And to be honest, most simply haven't understood social impact very well. And now these people run the ecosystem and are now looking to implement systemic solutions, and we're not there yet. So I would like anyone who wants to be successful, I would not recognize running a systemic approach. It's not a good way to be successful right now. It's a very good way to be unhappy. And I'm saying this partly joking, but partly it's also something I want to remind us of. Like, I'm talking with a lot of funders that are trying to support young people in their early stages in starting something, and I'm trying to remind them that running a business is something that is close to impossible. It's extremely hard to run a business. It's really hard to run a startup. The idea of running a social startup is absurd. This you can like there are some people who do it, but it's very lucky circumstance and exceptional people, right, that actually make a social venture work. The idea of a systemic venture, that part of being systemic means you are not in the foreground, you take yourself back, you put other people in the foreground. That's a contradiction in terms with the way that being an entrepreneur works. You try to be visible, right? So it's very, very difficult. Plus, there is hardly any funding for this. And then, of course, we have a fourth venture part of this is we try to do this in a way that is, dare I say, regenerative, right? That is in such a way that we do not burn our team out, we do not burn ourselves out. So that is like that bar, like again, running a startup with a normal burnout culture is close to impossible. It's really, really hard. But if you burn through enough people, you can't run a startup. The idea of social, systemic, regenerative, I do not see that this is in the realm of the possible right now. I love that we are trying it, but I think we should try it, and this is what I'm doing all day, right? So don't misunderstand me. But I want to remind us that the bar is in another dimension, and we should treat it like that as well, and sort of respect how difficult this is.
Great, thank you for the clarification. I think right now it is also time then to move to Hannes. Let me see. Yeah.
want me to get started, Rob? Or you wanted to say something? Okay, good. Thanks, Ivo. Very, very inspirational and recognizable. A lot of the things you say. I wanted to share a few things in the chat. Maybe I'll do that later. Some links that you also reminded me of about financing systems change with the Pando funds, about not measuring impact, basically. And I'll also share the link of our map. So I have a few slides to share about Rootical and what we're doing in Uganda, basically working with Ugandan entrepreneurs to build systemic ventures, agroecological businesses, regenerative businesses that are addressing key challenges in the food systems. I won't talk so much about financing systems change, and I also won't go into the detail of the startup ecosystem in a country like Uganda. But in fact, that's also a whole other system we could be looking at, as Ivo mentions, the accelerators. I was reminded of that. This is Rootical and our way of systems mapping. I'm going to first share a few thoughts, data points about the global food system to know why it's so important to talk about the global food system. Not at all exhaustive, just some impressions. And then I'll share a bit more about Rootical. And finally, I'll share into a certain level of detail about our systems mapping process and specifically the co-design or how that is the starting point for co-designing businesses, impactful ventures. The food system is quite fascinating, and I like to start with this, the illusion of choice, right? You see all these global food brands actually owned by about 10 global corporations. I've once seen a picture of a shelf of beers in the US, hundreds of beers, also owned by only a number of, maybe a handful of brands, right? So we have this illusion of choice and diversity in the foods, or in this case, the processed foods we are eating. But it's really nothing but an illusion. So if you see on the food outputs, the markets, chicken, breads, salty snacks, pork, beer, and so on, beef especially, they are highly concentrated markets. No, we call this oligopolies, with only, in this case, 4 corporations dominating more than half of the market in all those different categories. Right? That's not the food system I enjoy eating from, and that's largely, I would say, alarming in terms of choice, but also in terms of the control these corporations have over what we eat and what it does to our bodies and our environment. Then this is the last slide. It's the erosion of food and crop diversity. Right on the top, you see the numbers of varieties in some main food crops a century ago, 1903. And if you look at sweet corn, for instance, we had 307 varieties being cultivated and consumed at large. And 80 years later, in 1963 or 83, that becomes only 12 corn varieties, right? So, and we see the same all over for all the crops we're looking at and consuming on a daily. Basically, today, most of the food we eat comes from a dozen crops and very limited genetic diversity in those different crops, and maybe a handful of animal proteins we eat, right? So that's alarming. On the other side, you have also farmers like Julio Hanco. Julio Hanco is a farmer I've had the chance to meet and work with in the high Andes Mountains, 4,000 meters above sea level, in Cusco, just right on top of the Sacred Valley, very known for its tourism. And Julio, together with his brothers in the picture, or cousins, is cultivating at this altitude more than 300-400 varieties of native potatoes and Andean tubers, only found in his field, right? We mapped genetic diversity in Andean tubers and came up with about 2,000 genetically different varieties of native potatoes and Andean tubers in only this province of Peru. So we have heirloom varieties, we have a rich agro biodiversity cultivated by people, maintained over generations by people like Julio Hanco. And yeah, we're about to lose much of that, and that's something you can see from Peru to Belgium and Uganda, all over the world. I would say we see that genetic diversity, culture, food traditions being lost at alarming rates. And so yeah, the food system kind of pushes us to that power concentration and uniformity, loss of biodiversity and cultures. So yeah, one more slide here. On the input side for farmers, that's for farming, that's actually the same. You know, agrochemicals, animal pharmaceuticals, seeds, farm equipment, fertilizers. All these markets globally are dominated by only 4 companies, right? And that tells a lot about the food we will be eating in the future, and the genetics we will be finding on our plates, right? And so another alarming part here is, what if the seed companies we're buying our seeds from, what if they also own the agrochemicals that should go with those seeds, right? It doesn't give those seed companies any incentive to be producing strong, resistant, resilient genetic seed varieties, because then they don't have anything to sell in terms of agrochemicals that go with those crops, right? So there's deep power concentration and alarming markets concentration in our food systems, just as a starting point, right? That's why I'm so interested into building businesses that really transform the food system to being more decentralized, more fair, more inclusive, and more regenerative. This is a powerful picture of AFSA, the African Food Sovereignty Alliance, representing more than 200 million farmers and consumers across the continent. And I couldn't agree more, right? And we could say this for European food systems must be in European hands, and in Indonesia and in Peru the same, right? I really believe that regenerative agriculture and also food system transformation are deeply context specific, and the transformation of those systems should be locally owned and locally led. So with Rootical, we ask those 2 questions on the bottom here. What needs to be built to transform the food system in terms of businesses in our case? And then how do we get those agroecological businesses financed? This is a picture of our 2023 cohort, 50 food system change makers that we've engaged in an intensive food system leadership course that also resulted in our first Ugandan food systems map. So the 3 key pillars of Rootical, I'll go fast: regenerative agriculture and agroecology as the best paradigms for the future of our food systems, purpose-driven entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship, as Ivo mentioned, basically building commercially viable, scalable, profitable, and impactful businesses that can really cater to all. And then we also work on steward ownership as an alternative ownership model to make sure we avoid mission drift, and we walk the talk on governance, finance, and impact investing. And yeah, social venture capital, that's a new one I hadn't heard before, Ivo. Social VC sounds also like black snow to me. This is our impact model. We want to build steward-owned regenerative agri-food businesses that accelerate the farmers' transition to regenerative and agroecology, while making healthy and nutritious food more widely available and affordable, in the first place for Ugandan consumers, mainstream consumers, not serving an elite in the capital or exporting organic abroad to the West, basically. And we do so by building businesses that work on the input or solutions part for farmers, making indigenous seeds more available and accessible, distribution, last mile distribution of organic inputs, mobile fencing to promote regenerative grazing. They're all ideas, businesses we're working on already. And then on the market side, farmer-friendly intermediaries, regenerative consumer brands, and so on and so forth, right? So that's our theory of change in a nutshell. And then this is our founder journey in 3 steps. The first phase is a food system leadership training or boot camp with 50 participants, 7 days or more, very intensive deep dive into food systems. And we've spent more than 20 hours on food systems mapping, which resulted in the map I'll share later. We then selected, out of those, we select about half to join us for a 6-month systemic venture building phase, where we move from our deep understanding of the problem to validating that problem with target customers. So we make sure that the priorities we see are also their priorities, and the way we understand it is the way they understand it. Then we move to ideation, coming up with potential solutions, and then we have a very human-centered design process to make sure we build actual solutions for real people and their real pain points. That takes us about 12 design sprints, 6 months, and by the end of that, we organize a pitch day, and after that, we select a handful of companies, 6 to 8 companies, let's say, into the studio to continue piloting their businesses in real life and potentially co-found, legally establish their business with Rootical. When they do so, we also provide startup capital to the tune of $15,000. So that's our process, our founder journey. The whole process takes about 2 years, and then the businesses should be ready for growth, ready to spin out and operate fully autonomously. These are the 4 businesses we are working on right now. There's also 2 we are exploring in-house regarding syntropic agroforestry and regenerative grazing, as I mentioned, with mobile fencing. These 4 businesses work. Eden Seeds is a farmer-owned, decentralized indigenous seed company. Guarding Fresh is developing a natural fungicide. Regen Harvest is a farmer-friendly intermediary, paying farmer cash when they need it most, and using that as a way to secure supply for agro-processors. And Ecologic is working on the last mile distribution issue for organic inputs in Uganda. So this is our map. Looks a bit similar to the one of Ivo, because we've also used Kumu. I definitely need to up my Kumu skills from what I've seen during Ivo's presentation. You'll give me your contact. I think you got some help there. Yeah, I don't think I need to explain a loop, but maybe just this one is really at the core of our story, of our map. It's what some people call the crux of the system. Lower crop yields leads to more agrochemical use, that leads to reduced soil health, that leads to more pests and diseases, and that in turn leads again to lower crop yields, right? So this is a vicious feedback loop, as we have identified many of them in our map. This map has about 200 different forces or food system elements, we could say, and about 20 closed loops, and then in gray, a lot of contextual factors and elements that we decided to add for clarity and also context specificity, right? Because of a lot of those dynamics, I think they cut across from Peru to Belgium and Uganda. But there are some very context-specific elements in here as well regarding food cultures, food beliefs, and so on. So how did we get to this food systems map? And Ivo, I also wanted to ask you that question. How does your food systems mapping process look like in practice with your stakeholders? What are the steps you went through? How do we imagine such a workshop to look like? And I forgot to add pictures, but yeah, you can imagine 40, 50 people in a room, thousands of Post-its, and all those elements, moving them around on the floor, then putting them on the wall once we feel confident about the loops and so on. So this has been part of our boot camp. First, we say we have to love the problem, right? Einstein supposedly said, if I had 60 minutes to solve the world's problems, I would spend 55 on understanding them and maybe 5 on thinking of a solution, right? And so we focus a lot on love the problem, because otherwise we're going to see more businesses like we already see in Uganda that really are just copy-paste of what others are doing, or only scratch the surface of a problem and not really address key systemic challenges. So we spend a lot of time, our entire bootcamp, basically on loving the problem, understanding Uganda's food system dynamics. And this process also helps people to find their edge in transforming the food system, and then building a business around that specific part of the problem they are so crazy about. And once they understand it more deeply, let's say. And that really brings a lot of surprising insights People think they understand the problem, they actually realize they don't. Some people switch from one problem area to the next, which is closer to their heart, and so on. So maybe as a side note, all of those participants, we've selected them on their potential to become future founders, build a business with Rootical, and they really come from the communities that suffer the problems they are addressing on a daily basis, right? And so the process we went through is kind of first to warm up the food system's muscle and brain. We did an iceberg analysis where we just basically look at, okay, what are the events in these food systems? What are the underlying patterns, underlying structures, and then the underlying, I think, mindsets or belief systems, right? And that's basically an easy way to get the food systems thinking going. After that, we pick some of those elements in the iceberg, and we do a root cause analysis by asking 5 times why. Okay, people use a lot of agrochemicals. Why? Because they're suffering from pests and plagues. Why is that happening? Because the plants are weak. Why is that happening? Because the soils are weak. Why are the soils weak? Because they're overplowed, overcultivated, monoculture, and so on and so forth, right? So that's our root cause analysis, just to give an example. Then we're now looking at different parts of the food system. Some people are looking at market access, others are looking at soil health, others are looking at nutrition and diets. And so for that subsystem of the total food system, for that specific topic, they now define a North Star, the ideal state of that system that they would like to contribute to, and then a near star, let's say a 5-10 year future vision of where we could get to if we start moving and improving things in that part of the food system. This gives us a framing of our food system analysis and also something to work towards. Based on that framing, we then start digging deeper into the forces, what is happening in this specific topic, in this specific part of the food system. We do an upstream and downstream analysis. So downstream would be, okay, people use a lot of pesticides. So downstream, what does that cause? It causes contaminated soils and water. It causes, what does that cause? Well, it leads to unhealthy people, or it leads to some chronic diseases being more prevalent, and so on and so forth. Upstream would mean, as I did before, know what is causing, what is this agrochemical use, excessive agrochemical use, what is it being caused by? No, and that would be, as I said, the pests and disease, the weak plants, the weak soil, unhealthy soils, and so on. So that's our upstream, downstream analysis. And if you do that well, at some point you might be able to close the loop. You get back to some force at the initial part of your train of thought, and you're able to now close the loop. And I think that's the most difficult part in food systems mapping, closing loops. But that's what we try to get to with each of those different subsystems or topics in the food system. And then we conclude by narrating the map over and over again. We try to explain the map as we figured it out. So imagine Post-its lying around in circles on the floor, trying to make sense of it, moving them around until it makes sense, and then narrating that story and finding the central or the crux of the system, the central story that has to be told about that specific food system. And then we concluded with a food systems maps fair, where basically the different groups could go around and talk to the other groups to find out what dynamics they had come up with in the food system. And so that was the end of our 20-hour food systems analysis and mapping process. After that, we compiled all those loops and forces into one beautiful map, as you've seen on the previous slides. And yeah, Ivo, maybe I'm one of those that gets excited by this kind of picture. Then just the final thoughts here to conclude, because we're talking about systems change, and Ivo also alluded to it. I really like that idea. I'm an agroecologist, so by nature, I believe in the power of systems thinking, holistic visions, and also collaboration over competition, right? Open sourcing and collaboration don't always match entrepreneurial scarcity and competitive mindsets, I would say. So another thought here is that what we're trying, every transition requires its critical mass of change makers. And so what we're doing with Rootical, what Climate Farms is also doing with IARA and so on, is to, first of all, train those change makers and then allow them to be better connected. And once, here on the bottom, once we better connect pioneers and change makers, building those networks, building those businesses and getting them ready for growth in our case, then I think we get to a strong, well-connected, well-equipped community of change makers, or critical mass, we should say, and that would allow eventually the emergent system to come out and to take over from the dominant and degenerative system in food and agriculture we're living with now. So I think this is really important. As Rootical, we build business. We started with 50 people. We're now down to building 4 businesses and 2 in-house. But we've also trained 50 people at the start, and they might end up in policy positions. They might end up in NGOs, non-profits, community-based organizations. They might take up different types of leadership in different parts of the food system, and that's really, really critical. And they have now co-created that deeper and shared understanding of the food system as laid out in the map I've shared. And so finally, if we talk about system change and financing system change, I think through entrepreneurship, I think we should also talk about how those businesses are financed, managed, and owned, right? That's why we look at steward ownership as a way to avoid mission drift, as a way to, I would say, tackle or address the fallacies of venture capitalism and capitalism at large. We see, and this is from Metabolic, a partner also in Fresh Ventures, who is a Rootical partner. We see that a company or a business should be built with a challenge as a starting point. That's why we put so much emphasis on food systems mapping while creating those businesses. Systems analysis is the tool. Systems impact is the goal. And we always get back to this, right? Through different stages of development of our businesses, we always ask, is this commercially viable? Is it scalable? And is it impactful, right? Can we transform the food system at large with this kind of business? So starting one farm or starting a centralized milling company might not respond to those 3 criteria. The enterprise is a vehicle, and money is a resource. It's not an end in itself. It's a resource that contributes to the larger systems change we're seeking. So yeah, let me stop there. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much, Hannes, for this great overview how Rootical works, how you work on systems change, and the great work that you do. Is there anyone who has a clarifying question? Otherwise, I can kick it off. So my question was, when you have this list of how you work with the systems mapping, you were talking about this root cause analysis with the 5 whys, and you've mentioned this upstream and downstream number 4, and I was curious about the difference between the two. Perhaps it's just my mind that is not working properly, but I was wondering, what is the difference between them? Can you explain that a bit more?
Yeah, so the why that caused a lot of laughter in our workshops. Why? That's really we use it at the start to kind of warm up the food system's brain as part of the iceberg analysis, just to allow the participants to dig a bit deeper and to potentially also add additional cards or elements to their food system, to their iceberg. So for me, the why or the root cause analysis, that coincidentally, it's not a coincidence, actually, that's where the name Rootical also alludes to, right? The root cause analysis for me is the upstream part of the upstream downstream analysis, right? So we're trying to figure out this issue of over excessive use of agrochemicals. What is the root cause? Yeah, and we can discuss what that is. But it's upstream, but we also then look what does that lead to, and then downstream that will be the effects of excessive agrochemical use. So I think the root cause analysis, in a way, is the upstream part of the upstream downstream analysis.
Great, thank you. Anyone else who has a clarifying question? I see a lot of comments in the chat, but I'm not sure if there are clarifying questions. I think there's already kind of a discussion going on and questions and suggestions. Sorry. No one has clarifying questions.
I think Bram had a hand up.
It was a little bit of a deepening question. I mean, so I can hold.
Go ahead.
Because if there are no clarifying questions, then now is the space for the deepening questions.
Well, I mean, one clarified question is indeed, are you linked up to other networks to that are also doing systemic analysis? I think African Food Fellowship is one of those groups who are also a little bit doing similar type of work, working with young entrepreneurs and change makers. Is that something you're also connected with?
Yeah, we've interacted in the past years, actually since 2021. We haven't really closely collaborated, but we know each other, and we're also looking at the same financial partners for obvious reasons. Most of our systems work is mostly based on Acumen Academy, and they have a systems practice course and a lot of tools and contents. It's freely available. So we've kind of contextualized and made a lot of that our own. And of course, Rob also provided some input 2 years ago to our methodology with our participants back in 2023. Pina, go ahead.
Great. Pina, yeah.
Yeah, I also have more of a deeper question. I'm still kind of stuck with this measuring chains thing, and I was wondering because there's still kind of this problem that we don't always know if we are even going to the right direction. For example, Donella Meadows is pointing out that in system thinking, while we often know where the leverage points might be, it can be quite tricky to know which direction to push them. And therefore, I want to bring this question to you: is that how do we evaluate if we are going to the right direction? If we cannot really measure system change, how do we evaluate if we are even going to the right direction, if we are doing the right thing?
That's a great question. I shared a paper on that, Explode on Impact. Sorry, not a paper, a contribution on Medium. And you know, the current funding systems, especially in development, cooperation, money, are a lot about plan, measure, control, right? We need to plan 2 or 5 years beforehand what we're going to do. Then we need to follow that plan and budget as closely as possible. We need to measure everything, and then we're controlled whether we did our job as we said 5 years ago, right? And that's really hard, and that doesn't work for systemic venture building or I would say change or in general. And so what the article suggests is that we should move from plan and control to sense and adapt, right? And so we have financial partners like the Doen Foundation in the Netherlands, who are very flexible, trust-based funders, and minimal reporting and a very horizontal relationship with our program manager or our counterpart. And they really allow us to sense and adapt to whatever we experience, whatever we go through, wherever we feel we need to change budgets or approaches or steps. They are really flexible on allowing these changes to happen, because as we go, we learn and we get better, and so we need that flexibility to adapt. But I'm sure others might have. Ivo, go ahead.
Yeah, just not that I can answer this properly, but I think maybe just one nuance to why the systemic stuff is so complicated, because Donella Meadows speaks about leverage points, right? So leverage points imply that you apply a lever, right? Like, so you put a stick under the stone and then you try to shift it. And so there's an implication there that we are trying to forcibly move the system from state 1 to state B. And then there is this whole question of whether it isn't our experience that systems then just snap back, right? Like see current Trump reactions to sustainability. I've come to doubt this relatively mechanistic view of system change. That, you know, if we sort of push the system out of where it is now, then it will somehow statically stay there. If at the same time we also know that the system self-organizes around its purpose and will always sort of self-regulate again around its purpose. So Donella Meadows at the same time says that, right? Like says that the ultimate change potential is in shifting the purpose and the mindset or the paradigm from which the system operates. So I've been doing a lot of thinking recently on the idea of paradigms from which systems operate. So there's the Carol Sanford version of this now, where she talks about 4 different paradigms from which we operate, and what if our job was not to shift the system, so take out a policy, put in another policy, but what if lasting change was the effect of evolved paradigms in a system? Sorry, extremely esoteric and not practical, but again, we're talking about systems here. So what I'm trying to say is even when we talk about system change, we're talking about 15 different theories, at least, probably more, about how systems work and what systems are and what systems are not. How do we know what is the purpose of a system? There's the theory that the purpose of a system is what a system does. Or maybe the purpose of a system is also evolving with, you know, paradigm. So maybe it's, you know, a low kind of paradigm in which the purpose of the food system is to produce a ton of food. In Carol Sanford language, that is probably an arrest disorder paradigm. What if there was a way to evolve the paradigm of the food system towards one that is about evolving capacity of every living being that is within it? And again, that's esoteric and very hard to pinpoint. And now what do we do with it? But there's on the one hand the understanding that the things we are looking at are not things, but that they are systems. And then on the other hand, once we have understood that they're systems, there's still the big question: what do we do with them, right? Like it's like agriculture. We can understand that a field is a system, but there's a lot of different theories about what we do with that field after that, right? So I'm very curious about how we can apply the patterns of thinking that we have in agriculture to systems thinking, because I am afraid that right now we have an industrial way of thinking about system change. So very open question.
Yeah, maybe also your question is, how do you know whether you're heading in the right direction, no, with your system change? And so if you have your purpose very clear, that's a very good compass to navigate on. And so you will know. You don't need to maybe have very complex methodologies to measure that progress, I would say. I see you might not agree. Just two more thoughts on that, or maybe one. My father used to work in a very classic agricultural NGO in Peru, in Bolivia, back in the 80s. Yeah, and he once told me, years later, Evo Morales got to power. Right, he became the president. But he originally he's a coca leaf farmer. Yeah, and he once told me that would never have happened without the kind of interventions that my NGO and others were really pushing for, right? But that's a kind of system change. Of course, that never entered their logical framework or their theory of change model, right? Yeah, I don't question that, and I really think it wouldn't have happened without the kind of how do you call that, grassroots movement building that many of those old school NGOs were pushing for or supporting. Anyway, and then another thought I wanted to share, and I think I heard this quote via Philip, Ivo's co-founder. You know, if you want to finance systems change, find somebody who you trust can do it, give them the money, and get out of the way. Right? That quote, unfortunately, it resonates a lot with me, because there's so much we have to do to get some of the money and put it to work, right? And then account for it, which of course is normal, but it's, yeah, trust-based financing is a very critical aspect in this discussion.
Great. Domenico.
Just wonder if Pinya, you want to close or final comments.
Thank you for the opportunity. I mean, you both reflected on the complexity of the whole thing, but I do think there should be some kind of like way to measure it, because I know at least for developing world projects, there's a lot of the issue that people are doing things with goodwill, but they might even do actually harm with it. So while that having a good purpose is a good indicator, it's not good enough for me. But thank you.
There's maybe one version of this. Sorry, is again, if we go to regenerative agriculture, is do something, see how the system responds, right, and try and identify early indicators and lagging indicators, because we have no idea how the system is going to respond, right? So to avoid what you are describing, there's the version of system change that is extremely strategic and long-term, etc., where, you know, okay, well, we're going to do all of these things, and then at some point we're going to see whether this was right, or we're going to, you know, poke the system, see what it does, and then try and learn more from it. And that's essentially what we would recommend farmers to do as well, right?
Yeah. So what Hannes said in the beginning, so this adapting always.
Exactly.
Of course, we do measure and intend to measure over time a lot of impact parameters, right? Acres under regenerative management, amounts of agrochemicals avoided, safe and healthy food produced, hopefully also increase in produced and consumed, increase in nutrient density of some crops. You know, they're all beautiful measures that I think each and every one of them will contribute to the systems change in the right direction we would like to see. But then the question still remains, how does 1 + 1 become 3, right? Or for Rootical as a studio, how does the collective of the businesses in our portfolio, the businesses we built with Ugandan entrepreneurs, how does that collective make 1 + 1 is 3, right? And that's harder to measure, I think. But I'm definitely interested on measuring it and tracking it, if it's how to say that, if it's worth the cost, basically.
Should I jump in, Rob? I'm asking, you know, you're the master and commander today, so I'm asking you. All right. Thanks so much. Wonderful discussion. And I have a question. I have 2 questions, but I will ask one and then maybe later after hearing somebody else. So my question is that what I feel we're missing into the debate so far is a little bit understanding. So, I mean, I understand that there are issues around financing, there are issues around knowledge, there are issues around what happens in our territories. And, you know, your maps illustrate it in quite comprehensive ways. But I think that what I'm missing so far is an understanding of who are the actors and their configuration behind the issues that we are describing and we want to address. Okay, so this again is very high-end and esoteric, as Ivo says, but I guess that the practical point that I'm trying to make is we know that we want to act not just on one leverage point, but on a set of leverage points in different parts of the system, and that is needed because everything is interconnected. However, to work on these points, in an organic way, I think, as Ivo mentioned at the start, you know, like really starting from where the system is already going and sort of nudge it instead of, you know, trying to shift it and then with the risk that shifts back. We need to understand how actors are actually connected or disconnected with each other. For example, in the financing world, my impression is that there are these different sub-communities that are branding themselves and have different purposes. And all of us working in, between social enterprises, and social businesses, consultancies, and so on, we are seeing them as, individual actors to hopefully connect and see whether we can attract funding. The same way, in our territories, we know that there are like local policymakers. They can't do much because usually they're underfunded, especially in the current European Union with the cuts going for other objectives. And also in the knowledge and media arena, we are fairly disconnected. No one likes scientists or experts of any sort nowadays, broadly speaking. But in some way, they matter. So what I'm missing here is, in order to really identify where we want to intervene and how, in the most effective way and nudging way, instead of trying to change the whole system at once, but having a few interventions that connect few disconnected actors. Shouldn't we also get a good overview of the actors involved, not just of cause-effect relationships as you're showing? And I mean, from a theoretical standpoint, that connects with the message of Peter Senge, for example, that describes a system as a family, right? I mean, you can describe a family based on their own problems. When you look at any problems that any family has, actually you can translate it into a bunch of people that either have resources or not, have health or have not, and talk to each other or don't talk to each other, do coordinate with each other or not. So actually, actors and problems are two sides of the same coin. So let me pause here. I know it's, again, very high level and esoteric, but I think that without a deep understanding of which actors we want to connect with each other, it's even difficult to think about which role we can play, one, to survive and not go burnout, and second of all, how to retrench and disappear when our job is done. So any thoughts that you have on this, that would be very helpful. Thank you.
Maybe I'll go first because Climate Farmers has been much more successful and impactful in doing that than we do so far. So we did an agroecology actors mapping during our boot camp. So we in an hour or so we identified nearly 200 actors around this food system. We didn't necessarily connect that mapping of actors to our food system analysis, and we also didn't develop an actors powers relations map, as you were alluding to. And maybe we could have, maybe we should have. But I have a very pragmatic approach to that. We are building businesses designed to transform the food system over time, but we are very small. Those businesses, they start from the problem, then an idea, and then hopefully some first sales. But it will take a while for them to become impactful or at peak growth, right? I like to compare that with an agroforestry system. You invest now, but first harvests 5-7 years down the line, and peak capacity maybe takes 15-20 years to really get there. So I would say we do that, identifying of the actors and the relationships between the actors. We do that more intuitively, more as we go, and I think at some point we'll become big with our individual businesses, and as a portfolio of businesses, we will become big, and we will also have very clear ways to start weighing on the system and influencing the system. For instance, regulations are around seeds or around certification of organic inputs, which is lagging behind, and so on, right? But we can only do that credibly once we've become rather big, I would say, as businesses and as a portfolio.
I love the question and I share it. in short. So I'm not sure I have a good answer to it. So one thing that comes to mind is basically the idea that it doesn't matter which hand turns the valve, right? Like replace it, like we often have the idea that we need to replace the politician, right? Different politician is going to change the system, and it's just a different hand that, you know, operates the same machine. So it's not, doesn't make a fundamental difference. And so there's a question: do the actors matter? Because probably if you would take out, like, let's say there was a global conspiracy to take out Bayer as a company that has a lot of impact and a lot of influence, and definitely a lot of it is not positive. Would that lead to anything, or would that just lead to the system recreating a buyer, because there is a business for a buyer in this place, right? So it's probably not really about buyer. It's about the fact that the system dynamics allow for the existence of a company like this. So, and then that said, in the positive, what if the different system actors were to come together and act intentionally together? That might just change something, right? So let's say we take a smaller space, right? Like there's that theory around smaller nations, right? Let's say a place like Iceland is able to take certain radical decisions, or city is able to take more radical decisions than a larger country would, because of their smaller size. It's easier to bring people around something. So yes, now they are still part of a larger system. So the system is going to force Iceland back into a certain behavior again, right? But then is there a moment where a certain critical mass is reached that this shift is? I don't know, but I like the question.
Oh, no, it's a nice reflection. I mean, in a way, once we can visualize it, we can build a shared understanding, and perhaps creating counter power structures when needed. When needed. But I mean, perhaps with the visualization of it, we can decide where we want to pick our battles in building counter power structures, because we cannot pick all the we cannot build all counter power structures everywhere. It takes a lot of energy and costs. So, no, very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So there was, perhaps it's a misinterpretation, but towards the end of your presentation, Ivo, or it was during the Q&A, there was some kind of dissatisfaction with the kind of opportunities for systems venture at this point, right? But I was also triggered about the fact that you're mentioning it's not the map in the end that matters, it's the mapping, it's the process. And when I was looking at Hannes' presentation, there it says, it's the enterprise is a vehicle. It's just one kind of organizational form to do something. So I was wondering, could you, or would it be different if you reinterpret this kind of systemic venture as in it's not the thing that should succeed, but it's the venturing that matters, and how to harness the great thing. Yeah, so I'm curious how to harness the great things you do and the knowledge that's gained within your systemic venture, if perhaps the venture as an organization dissolves for whatever reason. So I'm really curious, because there's a lot of cool stuff going on. How can you, somehow regenerate the great things that are happening, even if perhaps the vehicle is gone? Do you have some ideas on that, or perhaps Hannes? Yeah.
I think the question is, are we talking with integrity or without integrity? Like the thinking here is a venture business has investors and they come in on a return promise. And any business has a risk that this doesn't happen. But there's a difference if you never had even the intention of returning anything, right? And with a systemic venture, the situation I found myself in often was like, is this dishonest? Because I am not planning to scale a business here. I'm not planning to make this business big and then sell it and then have a lot of return for the shareholders. I have always said that, to be fair. I've never held back on this, and I've always made this very specific. But the intrinsic logic of an investor is that they get something back at the end, otherwise they would be in philanthropy. So if like I agree with you, right? Like the venturing is the part that is important. So doing the stuff is important, and the action is important, and then the organization doesn't necessarily need to survive, which would again be a systemic element of this, right? Like sometimes you have a pioneer plant, and that pioneer plant is supposed to build the ground for, you know, whatever comes next. So the pioneer plant is meant to die. It's just a question whether the investor sees it the same way. And so the investor would expect that, yes, it might die, but it will return something before. So that's a bit the problem. And in order to return properly to the investor, assuming this is not a long-term, very patient investor, then we're talking about exponential growth. Exponential growth in nature is rarely done by the healthy parts of the ecosystem. I did not feel very comfortable aiming for exponential growth. That is eventually the aim is to push out all competitors, because that is the opposite of systemic behavior. I want to feed my competition so we have a healthy ecosystem. So that's where you run into all of these problems, right? So let's say if the investment process was different, and let's say the investor invested in some kind of index fund that would, you know, bet on the overall success of, in our case, the carbon markets in Europe. Oh, we contributed to that, right? Like we sped up the carbon market by a few years without a question, and we made sure that there were no larger scandals, and so I'm sure that we had a stake in the success of our competitors. So in that way, yes. If they invested in us, to be honest, those were some uncomfortable conversations we had to have with them, and said, sorry, we closed that business that you put in a lot of money. And yes, they always knew that we meant to pursue only our mission. But to be honest, they still hadn't really expected it. So there's one thing to say it and another thing to actually mean it. And I don't think they actually meant us to mean it.
Thank you, Ivo. That was a nice clarification. Also, some things that I misunderstood. So thanks, Hannes.
Yeah.
Perhaps.
Yeah, I cringed a bit when you said it's only about the venturing, not the venture. I think in this case, for us, it's really both. And for clarity, we want to build businesses that can become profitable and pay out well their shareholders, financial partners, and founders. I also would like to make some money out of building Rootical. If everyone else will, I also want my fair share. We talk about capped returns in steward ownership, so we have already defined that value beforehand to avoid extractive perpetual flows of finance out of the businesses and into private pockets rather than to furthering our mission. Anyway, so I think it's also the venture in this case, but the venturing and the building of this process, starting from that food system analysis and shared understanding, is definitely as important as the eventual success and impact we can deliver at scale. I think it all depends on how you define your end game. There's a great write-up from a Portuguese scholar. I was looking for it, but can't find it right now. And what's your end game, right? If your end game is adoption by competitors, then Climate Farmers has done a great job. If your end game is adoption by government, then that might take a while, but could be very impactful in Uganda, for instance. But your end game can also be to open source whatever you've learned. Partners across the world, a very decentralized kind of replication, which is what we're looking at with Rootical and Fresh Ventures, actually, then that's also valid, right? If your end game is to build a global corporation with probably, hopefully, more purposeful ethics and foundations, then that's also great, right? And then, you know, Ecosia comes to mind, Patagonia comes to mind, and so on. So I think there's many ways of contributing to the systems change we would like to see. And building a big ass venture can be part of that.
And I think actually now hearing you talk, I think I have to correct myself. I think there is two ways. I think I was thinking too narrowly about venture capital. So venture capital, once it's taken, locks you in on a certain path of growth, right? Like there's no way out of there other than a certain exit. If you were to, let's say, an example that I think should be done much more, if you were to build processing infrastructure for regenerative agriculture in rural areas, for example, that's a business that works, right? That's something you can invest in. That's something that has a systemic impact, and it's a long-term business that eventually the investors can also be bought out of. So perfectly good business makes it like small businesses, right? Small, medium enterprises have, I think, you know, may just really contribute to a healthy society, healthy community, have a significant impact in this way. So I have to correct myself there. And I just thought of this slide that I have stolen from Ashoka, so all credits go to them, which is these 6 strategies for systems change. And basically they say, and I think this is from everything I've seen, very correct, these are the 6 strategies you have. Like these are the ways that you can change the system. You can have a new approach that is copied because it provides a competitive advantage. It's just a better approach. You can have the whale. If a certain very large actor does something, then everybody else will do it, even if it's not the better way. Microsoft Teams comes to mind. The many fishes is another one, right? Like many people share an idea, open sourcing, change formal processes, ecocide, stop ecocide campaign comes to mind, building a field, building a market, and narrative change. And essentially, this is the one that works for Impact VC, right? You can through Impact VC, you can build something that has a competitive advantage, just a better business, and therefore everybody will copy it. So it's not that there is no version of this. I think there's an Impact VC game in systems change, and I think there is a small medium enterprise game that is very, very interesting. And then there's other things like, for example, the open sourcing, which your investors might not take kindly to if they expected it to be this game and then it ends up being that game.
Thank you so much. I think right now maybe Bram, your hand is up already for quite a while, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, no, it's I think it's a really interesting discussion. I think I don't have a particular question, I guess, but I think it's really useful to have all these people in the room talking about these complex issues. So what I see is really interesting is having both your experiences on sort of understanding, working, dealing with systems change. And I think we're touching upon some of those, you know, crucial issues that are making it very difficult to do so. And I think what Domenico was also referring to is like, okay, what are the people and the stakeholders behind this system, and how are they acting, and how are they building relationships around this? What I feel this also strongly relates to, and I think Hannes, you mentioned this, right, is this power that exists within the current system, and the difficulty that those powerful actors pose in order for changing the system. And I think we're also touching on the issue of narratives and paradigms, right? And I think both of you have reflected on that as a crucial way for systems change, and sort of the idea of maybe not per se trying to push the system or like mechanistically try to change the system, but at least with an intention of changing the system from a new view, that if shared by enough people could potentially have a perspective. And what I'd like to add to this discussion, and maybe just to hear also from you how you think about this, is this notion of the future. So I think, Ivo, you were talking about like, if we change something slowly, then gradually, maybe later, somehow it will eventually change the system a few years down the line, right? So what I would be interested to know from you and any others is to what extent you're also thinking about the future in terms of scenario thinking or foresight, in order for you to not only visualize that system that you would want to potentially end up in, but also to think of strategies to avoid those systems getting worse and trying to bring others along in that path towards a better future. And I think in this particular context, and I think all of us share a bit, maybe the negative feeling of a lot of things happening in the world right now on a lot of fronts, that also the future is being captured by other powerful actors who are developing their own strategies in terms of realizing that as well. So just not really a question, I guess, but just something to introduce to the discussion.
I have some thoughts there that like I've been incubating for the last couple of weeks. So this is sort of their first public appearance. Let's see if they make sense. So there's it's one of the things I'm most fascinated by, the systemic approach when it comes to the future, because I feel it's way underappreciated how much strategy we can develop if we take systemic dynamics and then we translate them into the future, right? Like, we know how climatic change is going to affect food systems. We don't know the specifics, but do we know that this year we're going to have flooding in a major European city? Yes. Do we know that there's going to be drought somewhere? Yes. Right? Do we know that the wheat supply chain globally is going to break down sometime in the next 3 years? Yes. Do we know that the corn supply chain in the world is going to break down in the next 5 years? Yes. Right? Corn is way too. Do we know, like, we are about half a year ahead of major pests right now in terms of the research that is done in GMO, etc. We are that close to like major crop failure. So let's just take one of these examples. Wheat supply chain breaks down. Then there is the systemic knee-jerk reaction that, for example, the European Union is going to have to say, let's take all the conservation areas and let's plow them up, and let's now, what if we prepared something, X, whatever that is, that in that specific moment kicked in and led to a different reaction? Fundamentally interesting, right? Similar story. Do we know geopolitical changes? Yes, we know. Is the Ukraine war going to continue? Very likely. Are we going to see major migratory movements? Yes, very likely. Do we know that something is going to happen between the US and China? Very likely. Do we expect that commodity-based economic systems are going to continue working? Well, likely not, right? So we already know this. We are not acting on that knowledge at all, right? The interesting thing is that almost all of these dynamics, while like, and I'm saying this now very unemotionally, right? Like, all of these are humans, and like there's a lot of effects there on a lot of in a lot of ways. But looking at it completely unemotionally, these things in the medium term contribute to a regenerative agri-food system. We're talking about the breakdown of commodity systems, well, regionalized supply chains. We're talking about a breakdown of the 3 major crops that we already know are unhealthy. Well, what if that led to the resurgence of local seed types, right? We see the Trump imposing tariffs on Canada and Mexico. Well, that is the breakdown of a commodity food system. Again, if we are able to use this, right? So I think we're using this way too little for strategic foresight. And there's a wonderful story. I don't know forgot the details of it, but the moment that Eastern Germany broke down, right? That the Socialist Republic of Germany broke down. There was a guy who had the authority to sign for conservation areas. And basically in that moment when nobody was watching, he signed up major swaths of land into like national parks because nobody was watching, right? And so there are stories like that when like crazy things happen, you can make some change happen, and sometimes they stick, right? So I think this is fascinating. Answer one, and then I try and keep this short. We currently have two civilizational options in the room. We have a capitalistic, free market, US AI technocratic system, and we have a state control for the benefit of all China's AI system in the room, right? Neither of those reflect my reality in the least. That is not what I'm here in Europe. That's not what this looks like at all. What if these dynamics sped up I'm sorry, Hannes, I'm going to use Europe, but I'm going to use Europe in the widest sense. What if this sped up an understanding of Europe that took itself seriously? So what if we took ourselves seriously as a third civilizational option that says education, art, full human development, regional supply chains, regionality, bioregional governance. That is what we are about in Europe. We have forgotten about it because we've tried to adapt ourselves to a globalized system. But what if this global push created such a stark contrast that we are like, wait a second, we don't actually want to go along with this. Let's create this alternative system. And again, I don't mean Europe in a geographical sense. I mean it in a wider sense. This includes a lot of what is happening in the US and a lot of other places in the world, of course, as well. So I find that version of the bleakness of current scenarios very fascinating. What if we used all of this for the direction we need this to go into?
Very nice. Thanks.
Go for it,
Very good.
Domenico. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. It feels like the energy is picking up in the conversation, I think, at an emotional level. Thanks so much. Great question and answer on the future. I have a question that looks at the process of systems mapping, and I think it connects with what we are saying now, because so what I was fascinated reflecting about the two presentations and the nature of your work, Hannes and Ivo. What I found interesting is that you have built these maps with different people, and I mean, what I understand from Hannes, you engaged a lot. Probably, I mean, I don't know how large is the group of Ivo. Actually, Ivo, with how many people did you actually engage? You developed that map, just to get a sense.
Directly, I would say 30 to 50-ish.
All right, yeah, and they are all like your network of climate farmers, say people.
Yes.
All
yes.
right. Okay. Yeah, I see. And Hannes, I found it interesting that there is this, this multiple cohorts, if I understand, with alumni that basically you have every year that pass on, this shared understanding that has been together. And so if I understood correctly, right, Hannes, you developed with different groups over time.
Yeah, every 2 years, basically. And what's interesting, and it's not reflected in our map yet, is that we recently had a second cohort, and we've presented the first map and validated and deepened it with that new cohort, right? So we're actually adding depth to the analysis and breadth as well.
Yeah. So I guess that the simple question it would be, what are you going to do next with these maps? Like, what are they for? And looking at connecting with the aspect of the future that Bram has mentioned, the question, or in a way, the provocation is, what if the value of these systems maps more than, I mean, what we know is that the value of these systems maps is that in any case, warm up the systems thinking muscles of the participants, so the participants get something out of it in terms of competences and build shared understanding. But what if these systems maps going forward, they really help to sharpen our narratives that we need to target to certain group of actors you know, supposing that we identify them. But I think that, for example, what Ivo just mentioned now, you know, like the third sort of, you know, civilization option, in my view, could become part of a sharp narrative, mapped, informed with local politicians in communities at regional level. It could work, a different type of narrative stemming from these maps could work for media. Of course, we know that the media, they don't snap with interest for sustainability stories, especially nowadays. But perhaps there are narratives that stem from parts of these maps that could be highlighted in order to attract media attention when needed, attract politics attention, especially local, regional politics. The same for financiers, public and private, and for scientists across disciplines. So I'm very interested to understand this aspect, what you do in general, and the role of system mapping to sharpen narratives with actors that you really see as key linking pins in changing what you want to change.
And please, if you could have a brief response to this major question, because I would also really love to hear the question or comment that Filippo has, but that, you know, just keep that in mind. Sorry.
I would just say yes, Domenico, absolutely, exactly that. Like the short version is yes, we need, this is what it is, and this is what we need to do. And this idea was developed by a meeting we had just a couple of weeks ago with mayors of various cities around Europe on exactly that question. So yes, exactly.
I would say we are a business building businesses, so this is not our core focus or core work, unfortunately. We have shared it beyond our own community on a couple of occasions. One of them is a national agroecology symposium here in Uganda. This is the first of its kind analysis, right? It's not a scientific academic exercise, but it has a lot of depth and validity just by the sheer diversity of people that engaged in it, and I think therefore it's really valuable. A lot of the analysis shows opportunities to build solutions or gaps that could be filled by building businesses, but also non-profits, community-based organizations, political change, and so on. So when sharing this externally, that's of course our main goal, is to make people see and understand the map and kind of apply the underlying systems thinking to their field of work, wherever they are in or whatever their role is in society, right? Yes, sharpening the narratives for sure. And just a final thought also on the previous question. When you mentioned scenarios, foresight, I was thinking of envisioning, right? And actually, once I was criticized for starting our process with so much problem loving, with so much problem analysis, right? There's other thinkers that say you should start from the big dream, from the vision people have, because that's a more positive, a more activating kind of starting point. Yeah, I beg to disagree. But yeah, I think that the envisioning and basically creating this deeper shared understanding with the map, the process more than the map maybe, allows also for that envisioning and yeah, sharpening the narratives, the purpose statements of the businesses we build, and so on.
Sorry, I was typing, but thank you, Hannes. A question and a comment, perhaps for future discussion. You know, as to, you know, what knowledge counts. I was triggered by you mentioned, you know, it's not scientific, but it is the voices and how people experience it. And I was, you know, curious for another discussion. You know, to what extent, you know, does it matter whether it's science or whether it's those voices of people, and how to balance different types of knowledge. But that's for future discussion. I'm really curious about Filippo. your question, and then perhaps that can be the grande question with which we can finish this this online symposium. I don't hear you, Filippo, but maybe that's my.
I cannot hear Filippo either.
You hear me?
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yes.
now we can hear you.
Yeah, no, was what I was saying, maybe this question arrived too late, but I was really interested about all the conversation on the presentation before. So what I was wondering during all the conversation, I build my background more on the individual behavioral economics approach. So I came from there, and now I'm approaching the system approach in general. So it's really interesting for me to try to integrate this two dimension. And since I really think that to have a robust transition, we have to have a systemic transition. So this is, let's say, the basis of the conversation here. So we have we need a strong stakeholder community. We need incentives. We need normative incentives, and so on and so on. But thinking also about our, let's say, society that is more individual than before, and is going to be more and more individual. Everyone has strong belief on something, strong social norms, strong cognitive barriers, cultural barriers, and so on. What came in my mind, and I really interesting to understand what are your thoughts on these. You really think that to have this transition, we just have to, let's say, put our energy and all the effort that the policies, the policymakers, and also practitioners have to put on the systemic levels, or is also important, and in my point of view, also pivotal to, let's say, connect these barriers also to what people as an individual person as again, a cultural barrier, a personal also scares in general to the transition, because also the media, also all this part of the conversation really point on this topic. This is what I see and what I feel, and I really want to ask your experience on that, because you really have many stakeholders with which you engage and talk, and to create this critical mass that you cited during the conversation. We have to also take in account this individual part of the context, or the systemic levels are the most important, or maybe the only important ones.
Would be so nice if there was anything like a clear answer in this space. I would love to say it is this or that, but of course the individuals are the system, right? Like the system is composed of the individuals, so of course both. And let's say if you are Hannes, I believe, and somebody comes and says, I believe we will create change by working with 100 and then 500 and then 700 individuals, and this will shift the system. I believe there would be a motivator to say, you really think that this will really shift the system? I don't know. Sorry, Hannes, I'm putting words into your mouth. So it's the same, like, try and convince people in the European Union about change. Yes, but there are very strong dynamics within that system that will, and then eventually that one politician will leave, and that will so there are underlying dynamics we are in, and I find myself often changing a context, and then I'm, you know, in a certain dynamic, and then I behave exactly like that dynamic expects me to, right? And then again, there is the individual's responsibility to be aware of this and say, oh, wait, why am I acting in this way, right? I've been brought up in a patriarchal society. So, and then it is the individual's choice to say, is that really how I want to behave? And I do believe that over time, we're going to navigate out of this. So I don't know. Love that I took the last minutes with I don't know. I'm
Your
happy
5
to go over.
cents.
Yeah, thanks. That's a great question to end with. I see different levels where we can intervene, and they're all important. I think they all need to work together. First, there's like the shouting and protesting against everything that's wrong in this world. Very important, but generally not my cup of tea. But I value it so much while I say that. Second is the individual behavior and behavioral change. I think we need to become much better at that in general, and also as Rootical and the businesses we build. I think we have a lot to learn about behavioral science and how to change behavior of farmers, of consumers, of others. Then there's changing how the systems work to more top-down policy, advocacy efforts, and so on. Again, very lengthy processes, especially here in Uganda, and then you might make progress 15 years and then go back to zero, right? By sudden changes. So I chose for the 4th level, and that's kind of building pockets of change, building small but systemic solutions that can grow into big, impactful businesses at scale, and then connecting and training and connecting those well-equipped change makers, building community for them, building platforms for them to grow, supporting them, from also, I should say it also from a personal situation of privilege, of course. I never came close to taking the risks that the founders, the entrepreneurs I work with are taking in their life. So that's also important to recognize. So I chose that 4th level, but I think they're all equally important. So there is no magic bullet here, I'm afraid. I'll stop there.
Great. I think we can continue for hours and hours. And my 5 cents is also regarding to the individual. I think that we can have a major effect on individual people if we start to take the narratives and reflect on the narratives that we tell each other. There's a lot of, there's a strong narrative actually that we live in very polarized societies, whereas actually research shows that most of the people, it's the 10% of the extremes that think very differently, but there's a far majority that actually wants to go in the same direction. I think we can change narratives in my case, in our lecture rooms, in the stories that we tell each other, in the theories and the perspectives that we teach. And then the questions that we ask. So in our case, when we are dealing with entrepreneurs, or whether they're social entrepreneurs or they have their impact venture, sometimes they're really, really focused on their enterprise and what they want to achieve. And then when you ask the question, and how is it contributing then to the kind of impact that you want to achieve? Is this the best? Is this the best way? What are alternatives way? What are the bottlenecks? Basically, when you challenge their kind of theory of change, or you ask them about what it is, we actually find out that in a lot of cases it's not that clear. They're doing what they're doing, and they think they're going on a good way. So I think also by the questions that we ask each other and the stories we tell, we can also have a major influence on our individual changes, as well as on what it means then for the systems that we're part of. So I think everybody can play a really great role there. I would really like to thank you all. We are 5 minutes over time, so I'm really sorry for that, but it's also a sign of that we had a great discussion and great presentations. I would like to thank you, Hannes and Ivo, so much for your time, for your wisdom. I really enjoyed it. I think the audience as well. And if anyone has an idea or a thought for a next session, either a theme that we want to cover on systems thinking, mapping, and co-design, please feel free to share. Reach out to us via the LinkedIn or via the email that we've shared. For now, enjoy the evening. Let's regenerate to do a great job tomorrow again. Thank you all so much. And the videos will also be shared later on. So thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. We appreciate the discussion. Thanks for inviting and hosting.
Thanks, everyone.
Keep in touch. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Domenico, Rob, I think next phase should be less sharing, more action together. What can we do together? Something like that. I don't know.
Absolutely.
Let's see. Stop.